In part 2, we're talking about the forces on the spine and the use of neutral spine and the use of non-neutral spine, if you will. So the quote is, when the forces experienced by the spine are high, such as they are during lifting, deviations into the elastic zone cause strain on the passive structures that has the potential to cause tissue damage. However, when the spine is in a neutral position, the stress placed on the passive structures is minimized, and the spinal muscles are predominantly responsible for controlling spinal alignment. So we've got the neutral posture. So as they're saying here, stress placed on the passive structures is minimized. And by the passive structures, they mean the vertebra, the ligaments, and the disc, because they are passive. The active structures are the muscles and the tendons, because they are acting on that area. Now, when we deviate from that, because neutral spine is a zone, there is flexibility to it, if you will. The passive structures that has the potential to cause tissue damage. So as we move from that, in some respects, we create tissue damage. So we have to sort of come to it from that understanding. Now, what comes with that is the individual doing the lifting. Because I have a certain capacity to lift, so I can lift a certain weight. I then have a tolerance to that weight and how much I can do it. Then if we go back to part number 1, where we had an occupational individual who is just doing lifting, they don't do exercise, they just live a normal life, let's say, they're going to have a certain capacity for lifting, and they're going to have a certain tolerance to the load as well. So their potential for lifting may not be as much as mine. If we then go beyond me and we go to a more sort of professional weight lifter type person, they're going to have a greater capacity to lift more than me and the other person, and they may have a greater tolerance for load. Now, when the occupational person goes out of neutral, they may have a greater potential for tissue damage. So if we all lift, let's just say all 3 of us, all those 3 people that I've talked about, we are all lifting 20 kilos. So the occupational person may be able to do that, but may not be able to do it much with a bent spine. I, however, may be able to do it for most of the day, because that's what I do anyway. I'm lifting weights up around, 4 to 5 hours a day. So I have a greater capacity to be able to do that. And then you've got the professional weightlifter who can lift a 200 kilo deadlift. So if they pick up a 20 kilo, it pretty much does nothing. So with regards to tissue damage, they're going to get very little tissue damage from a 20 kilo weight, whereas the individual that doesn't exercise and just lifts up boxes and works in a warehouse, they may well have a much less capacity to lift 20 kilos. What we then have is the repetition of that. How much do they need to do it? A professional weightlifter may be able to tolerate 20 kilos, but if they were asked to do it 1,000 times a day, then it may be a problem. Whereas the occupational individual, they may only be able to do it 50 times in a day or 10 times in a day. Whereas me in the middle might be somewhere in the middle. So we've got to try and bring that understanding to when we're talking about forces on the spine and the use of neutral spine when lifting in a gym or in everyday life. Because a lot of people will question me and say, lifting with a bent spine is fine. Okay, let's explore that. Who's the person doing it? How much have they got to do it? What weight are they lifting? What's their capacity for that? What's their tolerances to fatigue and how much they can do that? Because if it's the pro weightlifter, crack on. Go and lift that 20 kilo weight as much as you like. But with the occupational person, it may be completely different. So when we're talking about neutral spine, we have to put it in that context of who is the individual, what are they doing, when are they doing it, how much are they lifting, how awkward is it, what position have they got to be in or could they be in, so on and so forth. As I mentioned in the last part, in a gym environment, it's completely different. We can control that. If someone says, that's too heavy for me, we can lighten that load. But if the occupational person says, these boxes are too heavy for me, they may not say anything and just get on with the job in hand. If they've got to move 50 boxes from location A to location B in 30 minutes, it's like, right, I've got to get this job done. And that's what they do. They haven't got time to ask someone else to help them if they've got an awkward one at the back or whatever. So we have to understand, and when we're looking at the science, we have to understand what is that scientific study talking about? What is the context it's being used in? And can I take that context out and place it in what I'm trying to describe? So in part 2, we know that forces on the spine are different when it's in neutral and when it's not in neutral. And that's something that needs to be understood. We can't just blindly say that neutral spine is good and a bent spine is bad. Or a bent spine is good and neutral spine is pointless. It's not that simple. There is more information to it, and I hope I've covered a bit of that in the last 5 or 6 minutes.